Okay, so one of the lessons I've learned coming to this country, beautiful country of Lithuania, is that always get your presentations in on time. Because I was late getting mine in, and then my Mac and my Microsoft software decided to have a fight, and the Mac lost. So I had to rebuild this presentation in the last few hours, so hopefully everything will be great. And it's kind of appropriate because a part of the presentation is about happens. And I want to talk to you today about some of my experiences in mobile and also a little bit about how we at Mobility see the future. And so I could have spent the time talking to you about Mobility Ventures, but really I think it's probably more appropriate if I talk to you about how we see the world. And we see the world around what we call the rise of the connected consumer. And what is the connected consumer? Well, we'll go into that in a little while, but the great thing is that shift is happening in the world and it's driven by mobile. And it's a unique environment that's never really existed before in technology or probably in any consumer product. Mobile is very, very unique. And let's look at this. We've all seen these slides, right? And we're all told that shift is a new thing. But at Mobility Ventures, we believe that if you have the right ingredients, shift happens quite a lot. And it's not something that's new, actually. It's something that's always happened in technology. And if I were to introduce you to this, we've all seen these ones, right? I thought I'd get the most complicated one I could find and put it up so that we'd all go cross-eyed looking at it. Because actually, this means something, but it doesn't really mean a great deal in terms of the big picture. The reality is, within the big picture, shift has always happened. This is what the telephone system looked like when my mum was young, and it's used often as a driver for how fast technology is moving. But if you look behind the numbers and look behind the trend, what you will see is that there are lots of reasons why it took a long time for the telephone to take off. For example, technology was a barrier. It would take you 23 minutes. In the 1950s, it took you 23 minutes to place a call between San Francisco and New York. Who would want a product like that? Seriously. So the trends, the big trends, are important. Of course they are. But you always have to look for the signals. Example, here. Long time ago, right? 1900. This is a street, New York, Fifth Avenue. Horses everywhere. Can you imagine in those days 26 pounds of horse, that stuff, laying in the street from every single horse? Look how many they are. But look, just 10 years later, not a single horse to be seen. Shift happens, always has happened, and it will keep happening. So look for the signals, not always the trends. It's also important to go back and say, sometimes it's about ecosystems. If you look at the car, it's one of the great examples of an ecosystem. But we're told that ecosystem was created by technology. But think about the car. Think about somebody making a product like the car. Think of the petrol stations. Think of all of the systems that come together. Think of the guy at the end of your street that rips you off every time your car goes wrong. No matter where in the world you are, that guy exists. But you know what's really important? He's making a living from it. So the ecosystem has always existed. So always look for those things is what we believe in the company. Mobility Ventures is a quick introduction. We're a next generation fund. We don't just invest in companies, we also provide hands-on support for the companies to help them grow. We're global, we're around the world, and we're unique because we invest our own money and money of our partners. We're not part of an institution. So it means that we can invest in very early stage, mid-stage, or late-stage companies. And so that's the advert for Mobility Ventures. I want to introduce you to someone now, and it's this lady. This is my mom. And I introduced her because a number of years ago I had two problems. One was trying to get her to use a PC. I've always been an engineer, always been in the technology industry. I could never get her to use a PC. Okay? Then I got an iPad, and I cannot get it away from her. She keeps disappearing off to Jamaica or somewhere, she says. Every time I phone her, where's my iPad? She's somewhere else. She just won't give it back. And again, it's that thing about technology and how it infects different people. But also, I joined a company many years ago called, now it's called Nokia, but in those days it was called Mobira. And we had this crazy idea that we could send data over a cell phone. Nobody thought it was possible because actually in those days you could hardly make a call on a cell phone. And I remember the first time we did it, I went home and said, "Mom, hey, guess what? We've just sent data over a cell phone." She goes, "Great, fantastic, son. That engineering training was really put to use well." A few days later, a few weeks later, we did a deal with a company from France called CGM. They made a thing called a fax machine. There was such a thing called a fax machine one time. And we thought we'd put one in a car. So I went home and I said, "Mom, we put a fax machine in a car and you can send fax from a car." And she said to me, "Son, you should really get a proper job." And so we did, and we thought about this, and we thought, okay, what can we do with this thing now when we could send data over a cell phone? In 1993, Nokia created this slide. And you can see the vision of the future is pretty damn accurate. A couple of mistakes. The timing was a bit, if you like, optimistic, and everything had an antenna. But other than that, you can see an iPad, you can see a smartphone, you can see the whole thing. This was created in 1993. But as Thomas Edison said, vision without execution is hallucination. So you can lead a market, but can you dominate it? That's the question. So where did we go from that vision? Well, we had something like this. We noticed we had one of these lying around, and we had a perfectly good one of these lying around. And so we thought, why not try something here and see if we can get these things to go from a car to a portable device. So we created this, the world's first PCMCI data card. We put it together and it looked something like this. This is the foundation of what everything is today in the smartphone world. This idea of putting a portable phone and a portable PC together. But we didn't stop there. We noticed we had a perfectly good one of these lying around. So we thought, what could we do? So we remembered we had one of these. So we had one of these, we remembered we had one of these lying around. So we thought, hey, why not put them together? Ladies and gentlemen, the world's first smartphone. This was it. Come on, don't laugh. I mean, give me a break. I mean, this was early days, you know? We had to create everything. And this is what it looked like. We actually thought about it, we put it into the marketplace. The publicity was great, it was fantastic. We even taught Apple a few things. Actually, we didn't sell any of these, by the way. But we taught Apple a few things. And then the vision came together, and we created this, the Nokia 9000. But the interesting thing for us was that we always had a vision about mobility. And the vision, if you like, was slightly different to Bill Gates. Bill Gates had a view, and Microsoft probably still has this view, of a Windows in every desk. But what we felt was that mobility was different because it was aimed at everybody. And this is Silicon Valley's view of the world, and it's changing rapidly. But Silicon Valley still stumbles over mobility because they're used to this world where it's about infrastructure, it's about software for businesses, it's about the heavy lifting infrastructure stuff. And there are opportunities here for mobility too, but this is their view. So what's really next? Well, the reality is mobility is the first universal tech product. And as I said before, it's probably the first universal product. There's a business case for every man, woman, and child on the planet to have a mobile phone. Maybe not smartphones today, but there is a business case. There is no other product like that, and that really is the opportunity. You can create a solution for beekeepers and sell millions. But mobility requires support infrastructure. What happened in the late 1990s was that we had a boom in what's called a tech boom. And one of the reasons the tech boom failed was because the enabling infrastructure technology was just not there. So everyone sitting in this room right now who believe that mobility is at its peak is missing a huge opportunity. The infrastructure to create the real mobile world that we hear about all the time is just not there. There are 5.4 billion people. There will be 6 billion people that will have a phone in their pocket and be your customers within a few years. It's more people that have electricity. It's more people than, you know, there's a great stat that a friend of mine uses. He says there are 7 billion people in the world. There are around 6 billion mobile phones and only 4 billion toothbrushes. It's the most amazing stat that I can think of. But mobile it's been driven not just by the device, it's also an ecosystem. And if you look at what's happening in the ecosystem, the cost of this infrastructure to make mobile really work is coming down. It's what the editor of Wired called the economics of free. If you look at cloud-based computing, storage, all of those things are important technology, but they really are feeding mobile. 5 years ago, we had a little bit of a disagreement with a small firm from Silicon Valley called Andreessen Horowitz, because they were going around saying software is eating the world, and we were saying mobile is eating the world. It's kind of quite interesting that in the last 2 years they've come to realization that it really is about mobility. Mobility really is something where you can drive massive revenues. You can make a great deal of money from mobility. And you can do it really quickly because the adoption and the usability and the audience is so huge. We all know this, but mobility also drives, mobility is everywhere. It's something that you can talk to anybody anywhere in the world. We all know this. But mobility is very powerful because it's also nowhere. You can now be anonymous. You can do things and achieve things that you couldn't do with any other technology. And you know what? That means mobility disrupts governments. It disrupts everybody. It disrupts everywhere. And the more governments try to control it, the more difficult it is for them. Because you know what? It's about the individual. And you know what? Mobility also drives revolution. It's a unique opportunity. It can be fun, Snapchat, or it can be very, very helpful in certain situations. Mobility is unique. But in spite of all the talk, in spite of all the hype, it's still the most underhyped technology on the planet. Why? Because if you think of mobility as a screen, if you think about it as this, you're missing, obviously, the huge point. Mobility is about everything. It doesn't matter where you look or what you do, it will be driven by mobile. We see this hype around Oculus and all these different technologies. What happens when you leave the home? What happens when you're outside? We've seen Google Glasses way too early in the market, way too early. But all of these things will be driven by mobility and will be impacted by mobility. It is a new and unique opportunity. And for everyone who are thinking, how can I get involved in this industry? What can I do? What kind of apps can I build? You have a connected world where there'll be 50 billion connected devices. It doesn't matter where you look in the world or look in your world, there will be disruption caused by mobile. And that disruption looks something like this. It's a huge opportunity. If you think about any part of the industry, whether it's in healthcare, whether it's in minerals, there's no other technology that does the type of disruption that mobility does. Because every employee, if you're Walmart, for example, and you're creating a customer service platform, hey, you can create a customer service platform for your customers, but guess what? You also have 1.5 million employees. So that same platform that you're using to communicate to your customers, hey, what about those 1.5 million employees? How do you communicate and manage them and talk to them? Again, the only thing that brings all of that together is mobility. And the opportunity to build different systems, we talked earlier about the infrastructure and enabling technologies, is huge. It doesn't matter where you are on the spectrum, from information to user, there's opportunities for startups, there's opportunity to build solutions. And the infrastructure that's there today, the enabling technologies that are there today are just not adequate for mobile and for the volume of traffic, for the speed, for all of the things that are required in the mobile space. So the aim of today's speech is to talk about the rise of the connected consumer. So that's the background, that's our vision, and the rise of the connected consumer. Who is the connected consumer? Well, when desktop was king, we had a view of the world that was kind of really interesting. You know, the BBC used to say to me, Roy, at 8 o'clock I'm going to do something, I'm going to put on your favorite show, and you better be there to watch it, because if you're not there, it's tough, you're going to miss it. I mean, imagine that world where I was controlled by a faceless bureaucrat somewhere in the BBC. I used to be on my sofa at 8 o'clock to watch this. I didn't really look like this, but that's how I felt. You know, I turned up and watched it. And then something kind of strange happened. and fortunately I was part of this revolution as well, Netflix happened. And all of a sudden, it started creating this feeling of empowerment within consumers. And it's easy again to look at the trend and miss the real signals within the trend. Consumers now felt much more empowered in the sense that they could get information. But this is in the age of the desktop. The desktop was king. And other areas change also in the desktop, by the desktop web. These are all some of the areas that became different. And what it did was it gave us control of how our lives were lived, how we lived our lives. But then the web went mobile. And when the web went mobile, everything changed again. And now we feel much more in control. And we're also told that this is what the web looks like. This is what the mobile web looks like. These are the people who use the web. But actually, we think it's more like this. We think it's appropriate for everybody. Remember my mom? She's sitting there using my iPad. I think the only difference is how each of those communities look at the web. And here we have, if you like, the empowered consumer. Remember, they were empowered by the desktop web. So what's different? Well, what's different is that what we call mobile moments. This is now a situation where you can take action and get information in your moment of need. That's really the essence of mobility and why it's different. Think of Uber. What makes Uber really work for you is that when you want that cab, it's right there. You can get it. You can see it. You're in control. And that's really the core difference in terms of the consumer side. But remember, the infrastructure to deliver this, why Uber works really well is because it's an infrastructure company. Uber is not a taxi firm. It's an infrastructure company that allows you or anyone else to be involved in an industry that we never thought would be disrupted. And if I'd said to you 5 years ago, 10 years ago, that Nokia, Motorola, all these great names would be worth less than a messaging company that generates zero revenue, you would have laughed at me. But WhatsApp is worth 19 billion, probably 40 billion now, and those companies no longer exist in their old form, or in some cases not at all. The connected consumer is highly informed, mobile, loyal, hands-on, and global, but they want different experiences from their providers. And if you're a brand and you're not providing this experience, you're not going to be around very long, because these consumers, they're really highly informed and they do their own research. They book their own flights. They take their own actions in their moment of need. And the thing we talked about before that makes mobile even more unique is that it gives you a lot of tools that you can control from a small device. And if you think about the power of the mobile device, and you think about where you were a few years ago with your PC, the mobile is getting more and more powerful. And whether you're making microprocessors or whether you're making cloud software, or whether you're making applications, there are still opportunities for mobile to get even more powerful. And the real difference, though, in mobile, as we talked about before, is what we at Mobility Ventures call the demographics of one. Because it's the first time that you can engage as a brand or engage as a provider of services to an individual and know when that individual gets up, when they go to bed. Facebook knows now when you go to sleep. They know now when you wake up. They know now when you're at home, and they do not have to ask you a single question. They know everything about your habits. In fact, they know it better than you. They know on a Monday what time you're more likely to be at home. They know everything that you are doing, and it's all driven by your mobile device. So if it scares you, it's part of the world. My friend was driving home yesterday, and he's in the tech industry, and he sent me a screenshot of his phone because on his phone came up a message that says, "You are 5 minutes from home." And he has no idea how Google knew that, but it told him he was 5 minutes from home. So even we get surprised sometimes from this technology. But the demographics of one is what makes mobile unique. You are now talking to that individual. So imagine, for example, you are a debt collector. What's best to do if you're collecting debt from someone? Is it best to call them when they're at work with their boss, or is it best to call them when they're at church? Or is it best to call them when they're at home? Now you can know when they're at home. And because they give you that information freely, it's available for everyone. Also within the corporate world, there's a change going on there too. And in the corporate world, the difference is in the old days, you used to go into a big corporation and the tech guy was in charge. Then the desktop web came along and the marketing guy and the tech guy, if you do a survey in any country in the developed world and you ask the marketing guy and the tech guy who's in charge of technology, you get 80% of the marketing guys saying they're in charge and you get 80% of the tech guys saying they're in charge. And then the mobile web came along, and what happens? Everybody around the table has a business case to have mobility. If you're in HR, you have a business case for delivering mobility. If you're in ops or legal, you have a business case for delivering mobility services. So now what you have in each corporation is a battle going on as to who's actually in charge. Great opportunity for engineers, great opportunity for developers, great opportunity for entrepreneurs. Because the one thing that's factual in mobility is big companies do not get it. They just do not get it. And so it's an opportunity for Goliath and David to dance. It's an opportunity for startup companies to walk into large corporations now, and if they have great solutions, they can sell it to them, because big corporations are now more open about working with startups in the mobile space than they've ever been for software developers or any technology that came before mobile, because big companies know at the senior level they do not understand mobility. And it's changing so fast that they'll never get it. They'll never be able to understand it. So the number one opportunity right now for startup companies is to build solutions for the enterprise world, because they are open to your solutions wherever it comes from in the world. The response in the marketplace, however, is kind of not really focusing on big opportunity all the time. What is it that we do? Well, we get a little bit of Appmania going on, and it's almost like a bubble, because there are so many people focused on building apps that it takes away from the opportunity and the focus of where the real opportunities are. And there's no problem with apps. Well, actually, there is a problem with apps. Most of it isn't really used. And it's not necessarily the app itself. It's partly because we talked about the enabling technologies that make this really work. And again, this is a bit similar to what happened in the dot-com bubble, where you had a lot of companies that didn't really exist in the same form before that. Companies like Cisco, for example, was a small company, but they came along and created the infrastructure that make it possible for you to use a desktop web. The same opportunity exists in mobility. And part of the reason why these apps do not work well is because it's just not, the user interface, whatever it may be, is just not there. And it's getting worse. If you look at the numbers, they are actually shrinking in terms of engagement with apps. The interesting thing is 33% of app activity is one single app. But it is the future. So there is an opportunity there for all of us to play a role and to improve these numbers. What's really interesting is that if you go to the US and you talk to a lot of the big organizations, particularly in the retail, they'll be very happy to tell you that most of their customers, 33%, 40% almost, and growing, these numbers are low, they're old numbers, but the numbers are growing, engage first using mobile. But then they abandon the mobile and go onto the desktop. Why? Because it's really difficult to use the mobile to do and complete the transaction. Again, the opportunity is there for you to build enabling technology that will change that, because consumers are telling you they want to use a mobile. It's just too difficult for them to use it in some cases. And remember, we're just getting started. We have a talk before about generation changes and shift. And if we all know these categorization we all know these categorizations, and we look at the situation with the millennials, and they are about to take us to another level. Remember, the technology is lagging behind, the usability of apps are lagging behind, but the consumers are demanding more services from mobile. It is the best scenario for startups in the history of mankind, in my opinion, because consumers are now driving, and we, the developers, we are actually behind. We can all celebrate WhatsApp, but WhatsApp is just a combination of text messages and instant messaging. But it's a fantastic invention. But there's a lot of opportunities within corporations for us to drive usability, and right now millennials are demanding that we do that. Millennials will be the largest workforce. It's the largest cohorts that's ever existed, and they will be the largest part of the workforce by 2030. So this demand will only get stronger. Remember again, not the trend, look at the signals. That's the direction that the world is going right now. And they spend all of their time on their smartphone already, engaging with Facebook, video, and so forth. And they are looking for a way to engage with their corporation, with their employers, and so forth. They also spend a lot of time in other places on their smartphones. And they have different priorities. So if you take, for example, and I notice I'm running out of time, so I'll speed up. If you take, for example, their views on and their priorities is very different to their parents. And if we look quickly at the bank, when my mum was young, having a Visa card or a direct debit at the bank made perfect sense because, you know, the alternative for her was to get on a bus, go up the town, pay her bill, get back on the bus, go back home. In the winter, she probably wasn't enjoying that too much. So when Visa came along, direct debit came along, it made perfect sense. Now, today, why do we need Visa? Why do we need direct debit? If you talk to the millennials, their view is, actually, you don't need those things. The banks are saying to them, you have to go into the branch and you have to open an account. My son wanted to open a bank account, and I said to him, okay, we're going to get you a bank account. He goes, great, fantastic. What app do I download to sign up for this? And in the UK, it's impossible to get a bank account unless you go into a branch. And my son cannot understand why he has to go to a branch to open a bank account. It just doesn't make any sense to him. And so millennials are demanding different services. But also mobility is not just about the device we talked about. Mobility is about every industry we talked earlier. And so this is the world that we can see every day we go to work. And this is the world of the future. But what is the car? What is a driverless car? Well, it's just a mobile device. It's a mobile experience that will be connected to your mobile world. And again, if you're building infrastructure and enabling technologies, this is an area of opportunity for you, just as it is for you to deliver WhatsApp or any other services on a mobile device. But I think the speaker before talked about we can no longer do this on our own. We no longer have to do this on our own. But we also don't want to be part of this world. We don't want to be part of the old legacy thinking. Our world should look something like this. There's an opportunity for us to build solutions within the enterprise world where we can deliver services, but we don't have to solve all of the problems. It is now about collaboration, but collaboration in a dynamic environment that by the time you've thought of the problem, somebody else will be building a solution. By the time you build a solution, you better make sure that solution is flexible and dynamic enough to change, to take advantage of the changes that's going on in the marketplace. There are opportunities within very different areas within the enabling technology world. And whatever you read about, whatever you hear Google is doing, whatever you hear Apple is doing, whatever you hear Facebook is doing, the opportunity is still there for you. Because as these companies get bigger and larger, they make mistakes. Think of Facebook when they launched and think of the mistakes they made with mobile. They're still trying to get mobile right today. Half their customers only go online with mobile. But 3-4 years ago, they did not see the importance of mobility. So there's opportunities there. There are opportunities around voice activation and voice management because there are still problems to be solved there. There's still challenges to be solved there. If you've ever tried to use Siri, you'll understand exactly what I mean. But it's the way that's intuitive to us to use the device. There is a performance issue with the apps in terms of performance, in terms of software and technology, but also in terms of processing capability. And of course, there's the cloud question, because a lot of banks and lots of organizations do not want to use the public cloud. But that trend is also changing. But the opportunity is there for startup companies to build solutions and to solve some of these problems. And of course, there's the identity issue. And I think this is my last slide, and it summarizes a lot of what we talked about in terms of the opportunity. But in terms of time, I'm actually out of time now. So that is my presentation. That is our view of the world. It's about the digital world, and it's about the first technology that is universally available to all, but also the same technology to create the biggest startup opportunity in the history of mankind. Thank you.